Okay, so this is going to be a video showing how to remove and replace the DPF slash catalytic converter slash exhaust gas cleaning module, which Volkswagen and Audi Group like to call these combined units on the Euro 6 TDI models. So this is a 2017 Skoda Superb 2-litre TDI, and it is the engine code CRBL. It currently has a suspected blocked DPF. It's almost certainly blocked after several tests. We are not too sure of the cause, but it's suspected to be a leaky turbo from the turbine side. Turbo has already been checked on the impeller side and there's no leaks from the bearings there. It does not blow any leaks out when it boosts. It does not blow any oil out when it boosts, should I say. So that definitely needs removing, and the DPF needs replacing. Some of you may choose to gut the DPF, or I believe there is a band clamp that if you were to open it up you can slide the DPF filter out and slide in a new one. All of this will be doable from the same procedure, so I'm going to be following the steps noted out in the Skoda workshop repair manual, which requires 3.5 hours of labour to remove and the same to refit. As you can see, I'm going to be doing it at home without any special tools, without a ramp, and I'm going to be doing it in the rain. I'm going to create myself a little bit of a shelter in a second. Obviously it'd be nice to do it in a garage or somewhere else, but circumstances don't allow it, so probably be a good example of how doable this is for the average Joe who just has a driveway to work in. And as you'll see, in terms of the special tools, I have actually looked into what they are, and I have done my best to recreate them using other items. So yeah, let's get started. Obviously this might also include the replacement of the turbo. If we remove the DPF and I can confirm that the turbo is leaking, then the turbo will be replaced as well. So you'll have to watch the rest of the video to find out whether that's included or not. Okay, so with the bonnet up and the engine cover removed, first thing we're going to do is disconnect and remove the exhaust pressure sensors and the temperature and lambda probes for the exhaust, the ones that are reachable. So they do label them 1, 2, 3 and 4 for the exhaust temperature probes, and lambda 1 and 2 if you've got 2. I think the second one is only on some models. There's no obvious designation to them once you see them up front. It's just a case of remembering where they go or marking them. Also the wiring loom for them sort of dictates which one they go to, because they can only reach to the correct location for each one. So I'm going to just use a chalk pen just to make marks on them so that I know which one's which. It probably isn't needed, but it's worth doing just for the sake of it. You can also do the same thing on the clips when you disconnect the electrical connectors from the sensors. There's also some more up there which correlate to the other temperature and pressure senders for the exhaust system. So first thing I'm going to do is open this silicone heat protective jacket using these press studs, so just pop that open. Then I'm going to undo this bolt here, which is a Torx 30, and that is going to release the pressure senders from the rocker cover. Okay, so with the jacket open, I'm just going to undo these plugs, the pressure senders for the exhaust, and I'll undo this one's slightly damaged from some heat excess heat that it's sort of moulded together. So I'm not going to disturb that because it's sort of stuck together. But I'm going to pull these ones out of the way. These ones have been, the wiring looms have been repaired due to excess heat with a malfunction that happened. So that's that out of the way. Then I'm going to undo this T30. Okay. And that will allow us to remove the whole bracket. That's everything free from here. Just have to make sure that we disconnect the clips from the back because they're still connected to the wiring loom, and then that connects to both of these tubes which go down here. We're then going to follow them and disconnect them as far down as we can. It says to disconnect them at those connection points there, so it's a bit fiddly, but that's where I'm going to disconnect them from because it means that there's nothing hanging off the DPF then to cause an obstruction. So we're going to disconnect down there using a remote hose clamp removal tool, and I'm going to designate the hose with each pipe with a I'm going to put a mark on one pipe and hose so I know which way around they go back on. And you will have to remove that bolt there which connects these hard pipes to the timing cover. So I'm just using a flexible shaft there on the end of a screwdriver handle, and we're going to go under the coolant pipe and put a bit of a bend on the shaft just to get into there with a T25 Torx bit. So as you can see, I'm under there now and I'm in on the bolt head, and I can undo it. Now I'm using a T25 because it goes in nice and easy and it will undo. It will undo the bolt even though it is a T27 bolt. So just so that you know, I know that it's the wrong size, but it'll get in at an angle on a T25. T27 you're a bit tighter. Bit of a tip there for you. It will undo. It's not small enough that it'll skip the teeth, and the bolt's not tight enough for that to happen anyway. So that, with that connected, let's get the hoses connected down the bottom. Okay, so that's both of those disconnected. Put a large quantity of yellow chalk pen on one of the hoses and one of the pipes. So with that disconnected, we should be able to remove this whole assembly. Place that to one side. Then we need to move on to the exhaust temperature senders and the lambda probe. So we've got 3 exhaust temperature senders and 1 lambda probe to undo up here. You can see one here, and there's your lambda. Now there is also another exhaust temperature probe which I believe is on the manifold. So if I try and put you down here, you might be able to see it. I can't quite detect it from there, but we're going to get these out of the way, the ones that we can see, and go from there. So for the temperature senders, you're going to need a 19mm. I'm using a crow's foot spanner which will slip over and can be undone using a 3/8 ratchet or extension. Then for the lambda sensor, you're going to need a lambda sensor removal tool which looks like this. This is a 22mm size tool. Slips over and locks in, and again is undone by 3/8 drive socket. So let's get all 3 of those undone. It does say on the manual, I'm not sure if this is a typo, but it does say that exhaust lambda sensor 1 needs to be recoated with hot bolt paste, and all the others don't, because they're already coated with hot malt paste. I'm going to coat all of them with hot malt paste when I reinstall them. You just have to be careful not to get any of the paste onto any of the sensing elements. It just goes on the thread, nothing else. So let's undo those now. Okay, so in order to unscrew the lander sensor, to get it out, you need to release this little jacket, heat protective jacket with the press studs. Quite hard to do one-handed, and that just goes to one side so that you can let out enough of the wire to release the lander sensor. You are supposed to, what it does say is to remove it from its plug over there and to fully expose the wire and bring it out of all the clips so that you can undo it all without causing any twist or tension. What I'm going to do is count how many times it unscrews. I'm going to put that many dots on the body of the lander sensor or on the cable, and when I come to reinstall it, I'm going to pre-tension it with anti-clockwise turns and then put it in, and by the time it tightens up, it shouldn't have any twisty tension on there. Now I've got that one out. That was 4 turns and it came out. So this temperature sender here is pointing a bit of a funny way to get the crow's foot in, so I'm just going to use a 19mm open-ended spanner. They are quite tight, so just be careful not to round it off. Also, you should pay attention to the orientation of the direction of the probe as it comes out, so it points directly down and then the wire veers off to the passenger side of the vehicle. This is a right hand side vehicle, so it would probably go to the driver's side on a left hand drive vehicle. That's how it needs to be reinstalled. Okay, so that's been unscrewed. I've marked that one with the body of the DPF. Well, that's the cat part of the exhaust cleaning module here. That is now going to come up and be able to rest on the scuttle panel. Just try not to let it get wet or get any other contaminants on it, and certainly don't bang it against anything or drop it. They're quite sensitive. So that one is going to come out the way. That's all 3 of these done, and then we've just got the tricky one around the back to do. Okay, so basically this wire that we have left is what goes to the last one, so it's quite easy to find. You just follow that round. So as you can see, it goes down into the probe and bolts onto the manifold. So I'm going to reach down there, get my 19mm on, whether it be the crow's foot or a socket or a spanner. I'll see what works best. Okay, so with all 4 of those removed, we're now going to be removing the intake pipe for the turbo. That's this piece here. So the easiest thing to do is to take the whole thing off just to make more room, which is just to undo these little screws that hold the airbox in and remove the air filter with them. They're just T25s. So if you undo all of those and pop this little vacuum hose off here, unclip the MAF sensor connection there, release this clip, and this unit will come away then with the MAF sensor. Then we need to unclip these hoses from this tube. Then we need to go down here and undo that bolt. Let me focus, that one there, that's a T30. Once we've done that, we can rotate the whole assembly towards the bulkhead, and that will unlock it from its locked position with the turbo. Oh, sorry, there's one more to disconnect there just from the clip on the pipe. So once we've done all that, we can rotate the whole thing and remove it. Okay, so that's just my remote hose clip removal tool. So now that we've got the screws undone, we can lift the whole thing up, and because it's loose, it'll just come out. Put that down to one side, remove the air filter so it doesn't get contaminated or dirtied. Put that to one side. You would usually replace that at this point, just as a matter of course, but it's literally just been done last week on this one. As you can see, it's very clean. So we can release the clip. Let's get it in place so it doesn't damage the tube. That's that done. Now I've got to undo with a T30 that bolt down there. Okay, so with that undone, that's usually a captive bolt, but on this one the O-ring that holds it in place has been damaged, so it can fall out, so just be careful. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that this breather is going to be connected, so if you squeeze the clamp here, it should release the breather. That tube can come off, swing it round out the way, and then once you've got these out, all you need to do is push back, and once you've got it far enough, you'll be able to pull it out. Sorry, it's not in focus. And that's your whole air intake assembly for the turbo. To remove this top section of the radiator cowling, and then remove the radiator fan and cowling together. So to do that, we're going to undo this screw and this screw. They're both T25s. Then we're going to unhook this coolant hose from its two holders here. Then we're going to lift this and slide it off its catches, which are there and around here. These need to be unclipped. Okay, and with that removed, we're going to be removing this top trim panel, and for that we're going to need to undo that bolt and that bolt, which are also T25s. Then what we're going to do is we're going to lift this at the same time as the bottom of the airbox, which is held in by these rubber ball joints. One down there, one there, and I believe one under the centre of it. So with a little bit of pulling and prying, this will separate from the airbox, and under this end it will just clip out from its little seating position. Put that out the way. With that out the way, once you've pried this off its mounting points, it should also come out. Okay, so with that removed, it exposes this whole area down here, and what we're going to need to do is we're going to take this radiator cowling and fan assembly off. You can see the wiring harness that comes off that and comes up into this connector here. So we're going to be lifting the red tab on the connector, which allows us to disconnect that. Okay, so I've lifted the tab, and the connector will disconnect. There we are, the connector decided it wanted to fall apart for some reason, but I've got it disconnected there, so I'm just going to clip this top section back together because it seems to have come from behind the safety clip. No damage has been done. And then once I've done that, I'm going to release the cowling for the radiator, which is held on here by, if you can see it, it's a big plastic spring clip. So by pushing this in, pushing this inwards like that, but a bit further with a very large blunt object like a hammer handle or very large flathead screwdriver, it will allow this tab to slide upwards, and that will allow the cowling to slide up. So that also needs to be done on the other side, but not on the bottom, so I'll do that next. Okay, so that's lifted up out of place, off its little catches, and now with a little bit of jiggery pokery you can shimmy it past the top hoses. Actually, it can come out lengthways, it would seem. Let's try the other way. Yes, it was the other way. So there we are, one radiator fan and cowling assembly with attached loom. Okay, so that's another job done. I believe that's everything we can do up here, at least for the time being. So now I'm going to raise the car either side onto an axle stand, and I'm going to remove the engine cover from the bottom and go from there. To do that, you'll need T20 Torx for the small screws and T40 Torx for the big screws, and that will get us access to the underneath. Okay, so here we are underneath. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws, T20 Torx, followed by number 5, number 6 and number 7, which seems to be missing. That's strange. And then we've got a T40 there. I don't know if there's meant to be one there, but there isn't. And a T40 there. Whiz them out and this under tray will come off. Right, so that's all the nuts and bolts off. As you can see, it's dangling now. I like to take the small ones out first and then the big ones out last, because it will stay stable until the last big one's out. And if you can see, there's just these little catches, so you just get yourself a little flathead behind there and just lift it down to allow this catch to get through. There's one there, one in the middle which isn't really a catch, it's supposed to have a little bolt in it, and one at the edge, so if you just release the two side items it'll slide off. Okay, so as we can see, nice dry sump. It used to have the noise deadening sort of nappy, if you will, on it, but yeah, it had a bad oil leak from the crank seal or the cam seal, I don't know, but I changed both because all the timing belt was wet with oil and it was impossible to see where it was coming from, so they both got changed and it is now bone dry, happily, sump plug and all. So we're happy that there's no oil leaking, but it is using a lot, which is why we're thinking it's coming through the turbo. There is a back crank seal, but that would happily leak out of these holes here if that was leaking, so we've not got any issues there. So, which is to drain the coolant. So, what I'm going to do is remove this bottom hose and remove this bottom hose, which is connected to this pump. So once I've removed that and that, the coolant will drain from the whole system. I am also going to open the header tank just to make sure there's no airlock at the top. So I'm going to drain one hose at a time and just collect the coolant best I can. So if you can see, there's some fitting clips that are on these hoses, so you just get a flathead screwdriver in that little gap there and pry the clip upwards. That will then bring this little elbow into its sitting position in there, and there's another one around there that will do the opposite at the top. Once that's in place, once these have been pushed back into here, the fitting will be loose and you'll be able to wiggle it off. and it's the same with the other side. So here we are, flathead, focus, flathead in the gap, and then gently pry. There we go, felt good. That's one side done. The other side's not quite done. I'm going to help it up from this side. Might want to just apply some lubrication to this when you're doing it, because it's a little bit dry and crusty, but there we go. I think we're up and over now. Yeah, we're in a good position there. So once that's been done, should be able to just wiggle that now. Let's give that a go. There's a little bit of movement on it. Obviously just be careful not to apply too much pressure, because these are plastic unions and you don't want anything to crack. Okay, so yeah, it's a bit stiff. A little bit of wiggling and persevering, and it's starting to go there now. It'll just be a dried up O-ring that's in there. There we go. We're coming out now into our catch can, so let that drain before fully letting it off, and there'll be no crazy spills. Okay, so I've fully drained that and I've put the hose back on. I've done the same with this one, and it's not this front hose that we need to drain, it's this back one. This is the pump that we're going to be removing anyway. So what I'm going to do is remove one of the hoses, whichever one I can get the clip tool on easier. Remove one of them 2 clips on and get the hose off, and drain whatever comes out of this end in the catch can. Right, next thing we need to do is just remove this clip for the oil level and temperature sensor. Push the little tab in and it'll pull off. Then we have to remove the clip on the plug to unplug this electric pump. So you can see the wire going over to the back there, but it's very hard for me to show you the clip unless I can get over the top there. Maybe you can see it there. There is a little safety catch on that clip that needs to be pulled up. Just about feel it with my finger, but feeling it and being able to get it are 2 different things. Anyway, this pump now needs to be taken off, so it's going to be a case of, if the pump is in the way, the bracket that's holding it is in the way as well. Bracket I can see is held on by this bolt here and that bolt there, which are both just about accessible. So I'm going to undo those, let the bracket come down. That'll help me get to these coolant hoses a bit better to get them off, and it'll also let me see the back of this clip so that I can undo that. Okay, so I have removed that hose, and the pump is dangling. I've drained the rest of the coolant from it. Now with the bracket off, you can see the little security tab there that you're supposed to lift up to be able to get the plug off. However, I mean that loom is just going to be sat dangling there anyway. I don't think the pump's going to be in the way of anything, so I'm just going to leave it there plugged in. It's not going to be causing too much of an issue, and if it does, I'll just unplug it. But for now it can sit there. So that's that part done. The bolts to hold the bracket on were T55 Torx, so just undid them with a normal 3/8 ratchet and socket adapter. So that's that one out of the way. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be doing is releasing the pre-exhaust pipe. To do that, we need to access the sleeve clamp. You can see the exhaust there going down underneath the vehicle. Obviously there's a clamp right there, a band clamp, which connects the pre-exhaust pipe to the bottom of the elbow on the DPF. We could take that off and that will give us disconnection, but it's not going to give us enough wiggle room to move anything, so we need to release the sleeve that is further back. That allows us to slide the exhaust, this sleeve clamp, off the exhaust, which is just behind this middle cover under the vehicle. And as you can see, we've got some really bad corrosion going on the nuts and bolts. Now that is terrible. That is horrible. That's going to be nasty to try and undo. And the other one's just as bad. I can't really get the lens in properly to show you, but that is just nasty. Yeah, that is going to be fun. Fun. So, good luck. I don't know if I'm going to need heat or just a drill, but this may take some time. Okay, so I had to grind away the heads of the bolts, and then I chiselled it open once I'd exposed the shaft of the bolt. So that slid back once it was released. That's now out of the way, and we've got a gap there between the exhaust pieces. If we come up here, we just need to take that bolt and that bolt out, both 13mm, and then that exhaust piece will slide back once we release it from its clamp, which is there. So I'll have to undo that clamp as well. So let me get these 13mm bolts out. Okay, so with that undone, you can move the exhaust using the fact that there's a flexi there. So that's loose, that end. It's just resting on this panel. There is a butterfly valve under there with a piece of electrical loom on it, but you don't need to worry about that. You're not moving it far enough to cause any issues. We just need to get this band off now. So up the top there, it needs a 4mm hex key. You can just see the edge of the bolt at the top there. It needs to be undone from behind here really tight to get in, but you can just about get a 3/8 ratchet in there. Once that's done, this will be loose enough to slide off, and then this piece along with this will move back and out of the way. Okay, so I've pushed that back out the way there. It's just sitting out the way now. Next thing we're going to do is remove the pendulum support. So 16mm bolt there, 16mm bolt there, and a 21mm bolt there. Undo those three. Pendulum support will come out the way. Okay, so that's this bolt out, that bolt out, and that bolt out. So we can just remove the pendulum support, or not. Is it stuck? Just wiggle it. There we go. Out it comes. And now the engine can swing. That feels very weird and very dangerous, especially when you're led under it, but the engine can swing, that's what we want. Okay, so the next thing to do would be to remove the fourth temperature sender for the exhaust. However, this model and some models we'll have a lambda after the cat, so that's what we need to take out instead. So that lambda just needs to be removed. Same size as before, 22mm. It's going to be a bit tricky, this one, because it's pointing upwards, so I'm not sure whether it's best to do it from the top or the bottom, but we'll get that one out and that will be the next step done. Okay, so once the lambda sensor slash exhaust temperature sensor is out, I'm going to be taking the drive shaft out, so I'll start with undoing the wheel nuts and taking the wheel off. Okay, so that's 17mm to take the wheel nuts off. Then you want a 22mm to take the drive shaft nut out. So that was too tight for the knocker gun, so what I did was put a flathead screwdriver through the hole in the caliper and through into one of the vents of the disc to stop the hub from spinning, and then I got a breaker bar and undid the nut with the breaker bar. I'm going to leave the socket on the end because we're going to use that to tap the shaft out the back of the hub. Okay, so now I'm going to want to remove this nut here, 21mm nut. That's for the steering rack. So the track rod end, undo that and pop that out. Okay, then we want to undo these 3 nuts underneath the wishbone. They are 16mm, and then we can pry the wishbone down from the hub, and once those nuts are off we can pry the wishbone off the threads, and we should have a loose hub that we can knock our drive shaft out of. But we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to keep it in there for now. Okay, so our hub is now movable back and forth. Just going to tap this socket, unscrew it a bit further, tap it, and that confirms that the drive shaft is loose. So that's not going to be stuck in the hub. So we're ready for removing the drive shaft. However, we don't want it to lean and sit on the joint, so we're going to go to the inner side of it and undo that now. Okay, so at the other end of the drive shaft we've got these 6 bolts that need undoing. They are an M10 ribe tool, which I think is 12 sided, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, yeah. So they need to be undone. And that means you still need the screwdriver in the vent for the disc to keep it all still. Okay, back under the car. What you're going to need to do is undo this 10mm bolt. Then you're going to need to undo, where is it? That. No, not that. That 13mm nut. I think. Okay, so you're going to need to undo that T30 Torx bolt there, and then after you've done that and this 10mm, you need to remove both those hose clips either side of that metal T-piece and take both hoses off the T-piece, and then this metal pipe will come free and can be removed, which is currently in the way. Scrub that, it was the 13. There's also a little 10mm there, just hiding. That needs undoing as well. Okay, so next thing you want to do is remove that bolt there, which is holding the heat shield on, and there's also another one there. They are an M12 ribe bit. So undo them, take this padding comes off then. Okay, so next thing you need to do is to push the engine forward towards the radiator. Now you're supposed to have a special tool for this, but I've built one. So it bolts on to one of the original bolts of the pendulum support, and it also bolts through an M8 threaded hole in the subframe. So I've used 2 pieces of angle iron and a threaded bar. I've just popped the pendulum support back in place to take up the slack. I've got a ratchet spanner on a 13mm nut. That end is bolted tight. This end, as I ratchet the nut, it will be pushing. Get some tension on it. That is now pushing the engine forward bit by bit. So I'm going to ratchet this all the way. It's got all this bar to travel, and we'll see how close we can get it to the radiator. Okay, so quite a big gap there now. So the engine's been pushed quite far forward. There's still a bit of a gap between some of the ancillary parts and the radiator, but probably wouldn't have been able to do that without removing the radiator cowling. So that leaves a much bigger area to pull the DPF down through. Okay, so whilst we're under here, the remaining bolts that we'll need to disconnect the DPF are one which is there. There is another one just after it there, so those two. Then there's this one that holds it to its mounting bracket, and the other one is just, you can just see it in the distance there. They're both M10 ribes, or you can get them with a 8mm hex key. And then this exhaust band clamp here, somewhere up there, there is somewhere up there you'll just about be able to see. Possibly. Is that just in picture? I think I got that in picture. I'm not too sure, but it was the connection for the band clamp for the exhaust module to EGR radiator connection. And if I try to go in there now, if it's the same as the other two band clamps, it will be a 5mm hex key. That's the next thing to undo. Okay, so I ran out of battery and light, so I managed to do the rest of the job off camera, unfortunately. However, I did show you the last few bolts that needed to be undone to get the DPF out. The exhaust clamp was very difficult to get to. If you can see in the last clip, the silver looking heat shield, similar to that, like a little packet sort of thing. You can see that near the exhaust clamp, just above the exhaust clamp in the last clip. What you have to do is send in a long, it was a 4mm hex key on that one. Quite annoying considering the other two band clamps I've had to undo are 5mm, but it was a 4mm hex key band clamp where you needed to send the tool in behind the oil feed line, or should I say through the oil feed line bend, and as far up as you could angle it, sort of leaning the tool against the heat protection packet. That was the only way it would line up with the clamp. As soon as it's opened, you can slide the clamp down. You might need to knock it a few times with a hammer to loosen it, but don't do it too hard, otherwise you'll damage the clamp. But if you just shock it a little bit, you can spin the clamp around and put it into a much easier position to get to. So once I did that, I positioned my tool on top of the engine. You don't have to do this, but that was a tool that I can put together to try and emulate one of the Skoda workshop tools, which is an assembly aid, and it holds the DPF in the correct position. So what I did was put my tool in place, attach it via a cable tie to the hook on the top of the DPF, applied some tension so that it was able to take the weight, and then I took out the rest of the bolts and the band clamp. Once that had been done, the DPF didn't move, which means I knew that my tool was taking up the weight of it. At that point, I lifted the DPF further up than what it should be and unhooked my tool, and then let the DPF go down. And once it goes down to the back, it doesn't just fall out. You have to really snake it out. It only just gets out. I'm probably going to have some trouble getting it back in, but it only just fits out the gap. If you can get your engine further forward than this, you'll probably find it a lot easier, but I can't. The tool that I use to push the engine forward is using an M8 threaded rod. I would recommend strongly, for safety reasons and for functionality, to use an M10 or an M12 or even an M14, because the amount of flex that's on that rod now is ridiculous, and it's just not got the strength in it over such a length to push the engine. When the engine's in its resting position, it's really easy to swing, but once you get it to this point, it's really difficult to get it to go any further. However, I believe it should be a little bit further, because that DPF only just came out of that hole. Anyway, turns out I did need a turbo. When we got to the exhaust side of the turbo, I was able to get hold of both ends of the shaft, and there was a little bit of in and out play, which is a no-no. And we think that some oil was coming through the turbo and filling up the DPF. Lovely. So, to remove the turbo, obviously I can't show you this because I did it all, but to remove the turbo, what I had to do, we already had both hoses off the intake side of the turbo, and I can't remember whether I showed this or not, but you can just see down there the EGR radiator. Now that pipe that you can see with the clip on, this one, was connected to the inlet side of the turbo. I can't remember filming me removing that, but that needs to be taken off. Then there was an electrical plug that went onto that black part there. You need to take that off as well. Then there was a coolant pipe which went into here, which went over the top of the turbo. That was bolted on to through that little bolt hole there, if you can see it. I'm just rubbing my thumb over it. So there was it clips in behind here and bolts to that, and then it comes over the top and links into here and here. So this is the tube in question. I've just got it hooked up out the way at the moment, but there's just a tab there which comes off. It's almost in its position. The screw goes through there. What you do is you slot that down there, and the screw goes from the back of there and into there. So you remove that pipe. The plug that we talked about on the EGR radiator. There was also a plug. I'll just show you on the new turbo. So on the new turbo there was a plug on the back of this pressure regulator here, or actuator. It's actually not an actuator. Well, it is an actuator, but it works in a different way. It's not wastegated, it's variable nozzle turbo VNT, so it just changes the angle of the vanes inside. So there was this electrical plug to pull off, and on the back there was a vacuum there. Once we'd got that off, there was one exhaust temperature sensor which it was labelled as number 4, and it told me that I needed to take this out to get the DPF off. However, I found out that I didn't need to, and I couldn't get to it anyway, and that one went into there. So whilst I got the DPF off, and when it came to removing the turbo, there was still that sensor in there. Just couldn't get to it with the DPF on. I just don't have the funny shake tools that they have in the Skoda workshop. However, it's nice and easy to get to now, and even with the turbo installed, it's nice and easy to get to in situ. So I'm going to be reinstalling that sensor with the turbo installed before I put the DPF back. Once you put the DPF on here, it just blocks your access. You can't see what you're doing, you can hardly reach it. And then there was just 10 manifold bolts to undo, all fairly easy and accessible, to be fair. Once I did that, the turbo came off. So new turbo, I've primed it with oil and just plugged up the centre cartridge at the moment. I've got the new oil feed fitted with a crush washer. I am just about to replace the studs. Well, there was only one stud that came out of the head. I'm going to keep the rest. The rest were absolutely fine. I'm going to replace one stud that came out, put a new stud in. I got all new studs, gaskets, oil feed pipe, copper nuts, O-ring, and some other nuts and bolts for other parts of the intake that didn't come with the turbo, but this all came with the turbo from this company, Vehicle, I think you call it. Quite a decent price. 2-year guarantee with no mileage limit. That's what we like to hear. So I'm going to pop my I've obviously cleaned up the surface that the manifold sits against, and I've cleaned up the back of the engine, made sure everything's grease free and all dry. So I'm going to pop this stud in place and follow that with a manifold gasket. Then I'm going to lift the turbo up into place and get some bolts on to secure that down. To tighten the bolts up, what you need to do is, the old bolts were actually 12mm, so I'm going to check these new ones because they look like these are 13s. Right, yes, so these new ones are 13s, so that'd be quite annoying for people, but new ones will probably be 13 unless you get them from Skoda, and the old ones, or the original ones, were 12. So what you need to do is you need to apply these fix these nuts in place on the middle stud, and then tighten them in a crisscross manner from middle to outer. So I did that quite wrong there, but yeah, so basically, you know, the further out the later it is. You first of all tighten these to 11 Newton meters. Then stage 2 you do it the same pattern but it's 22 Newton meters, and then you do it again to 22 Newton meters because it accounts for the material settling. So that will be the turbo in place. So I'm going to do that now and follow it on from there. A couple of little things I was forgetting as well. This is also something that had to be taken off. So this is a bracket, a mount which holds this is bolted to the engine block, and then this holds the DPF slash cat in place. So that bolt needs to be taken out in order to get the turbo off, but I had to take this out just to get the DPF out because it sort of came out here and it was getting caught between here and the subframe, so it couldn't drop down past. But by removing these bolts I could slide this around DPF and get it out of the way, and then the whole thing dropped down. So to put it back in, once the turbo's in place, I'm gonna put the DPF up between the you know, past the point that it was getting stuck on, so it can rest against the engine block. I'm going to slide this around the back of it and bolt it in, bolt this to the bottom of the manifold, and then that will be ready for the DPF to go in. I also forgot to say that the heat shield for the turbo, I took that off, and also these little things, balancing shafts. There are several of them and they must be calibrated and set. There are specific instructions for them. They're left-hand thread, so you turn them clockwise to bring them out. They've got these little bands on them, or I think they're called straps, and the calibration tool brings these to the correct dimensions by, I believe, what you do is you place this inside the tool so it has somewhere to sit, and then you place a striking pin inside here, which I believe is exactly the same size as this ball, and then you push down and strike it with your palm of your hand, and that pushes out here and ensures that all of these are at the correct dimension. So what I found was to rest this in a socket and to find a drill bit that was the correct diameter for this and push it through. I actually found a very thin deep walled socket to fit inside here perfectly. I believe it was something like a 5mm socket from a 1/4 inch drive set, deep socket, so push that down and it brings these out, and there's a procedure of putting them back in and ensuring that they're free and that they're set correctly, that you have to follow in order to make sure that the DPF is not under any tension. I believe there was only one on this top section and not one on the bottom, which is a bit strange. There was also 2 more on the edge that I showed you in the last couple of videos, that where it was attached to the side of the engine block, and there was 1 more on top where it was attached right near the rocker cover. So I think there's 4 in total of these balancing elements. They all need to be calibrated and set correctly so that when you bolt it all back down there's no excess tension, you don't end up with a cracked exhaust cleaning module. Okay, so as you can see, the new turbocharger is in place. I've torqued all the copper nuts into place in 3 stages. Next thing to do is to refit the turbo drain hose. You should use a new one. I have made sure that mine, in a hurricane here, I've made sure that mine is free of obstructions. There's no gunk in it or anything like that. It is completely clear. It's in good condition. And I've got a new O-ring for it and a new gasket for it. So we're gonna offer this up to the turbo, and it's gonna slide into the hole there on the block, which also has a little grub screw, well, a little threaded hole ready for a fastening screw. So I believe first thing we do is pop it into the mounting hole, and then try to line up the screw hole, and there is a bit of flex on this pipe, so we're able to slightly bend it into position. I'm going to get the screw for here started first. Okay, so I got that screw in, and then I just pushed the fitting into the block. The screw's still loose at the moment, but it's enabled me to line up the flange. Just took the bolts out temporarily so we know it's lined up, and it's not quite at the moment, but it's quite flexible, so you can see that it lines up there. So I'm just going to feed these bolts on the end of a socket. With an extension, and we'll just poke them through there and twirl them as we go and let them find the thread. Get them started on the thread. That's that one in. Let's do the other. Okay, so everything is hand tight. So I'm going to go in with the torque wrench now. So this is 10mm bolts that go onto the turbo, and we're going to do them to 14 Newton meters. Okay, that's enough. So that's them two done. Then we're going to go in and nip this one up. It's a T30, and that wants to be tightened to 10 Newton meters. That's the drain pipe done then and fully installed. Okay, so brand new feed hose. This end goes on the turbo. Up there, got a little union, so I'm going to pop that in and just get that screwed on so that we don't have it falling. Right, so you want it orientated like that. So I've got it just loosely fitted there. There's a little bit of play in it, but it sits with the tag going over that hole, ready for the securing bolt. and then down here you've got the banjo bolt that's ready to go in the block. So I'm just going to pull this little clip off, this installation aid. I'm just going to try and get it into the hole first because there's a little bit of thread exposed, so you can actually turn the bolt and get it started on the thread before you pull this clip out. Some nice little touch you get when you shop at the main steelers. So I believe if you give it a little bit more slack on the union, you can get a little bit more play on the whole pipe, enough to get yourself started on this. And then once that's in, do this up finger tight, do that up finger tight, and then you want to get your bolt and put it through there. Then we're going to be tightening this to 30 Newton meters, this to 22 Newton meters, and the bolt that goes in there is a M10 Ribe bolt. You can get that, oh no, it's an M12, sorry, Ribe fitting, and that's going to be tightened to 12 Newton meters. That is 17mm, and to be able to torque it you'll need a crow's foot spanner, and that is just a 17mm banjo bolt that you can do with a socket. Let's get all these fitted and torqued up. Okay, so that's both of those installed. So now dangling down is the exhaust gas temperature sensor. I'm going to coat these threads in hot bolt paste. That's going to be installed in there with the orientation of this solid angled metal piece pointing straight down like so, with the wiring loom going over the top and clipping into the heat shield on the turbo. So that is going to be a 17mm torqued down with a crow's foot fitting to 45 Newton meters. So just want some hot bolt paste. First time I've used this stuff. Gonna get that evenly spread around the threads, make sure I don't get any on the actual sensor. Obviously I'm trying to do this one-handed, so it's not the easiest, but I'll tidy that up and get it in. Okay, so back up top we've got this heat shield which I had to remove from the end of the manifold. These are T30 Torx and need to be tightened up to 15 Newton meters. So that goes if you can see just on the manifold, on the manifold goes on like that. One hole there, the other hole over there. So thread these in, tighten them to 15 Newton meters. Once that's been done, we've got to bring, so this is another thing I didn't manage to show. There was a boost pipe coming along here which I undid. That bolts to the bottom of here and to here. That just undoes with T30 Torx and it sort of sits along here. Needed to get that out of the way so that I could undo these coolant pipes, and the only reason the coolant pipes need to be out of the way is so that you can get to the bolt to release the EGR radiator. So we've got this guy. This guy here sits on the bulkhead, and it's those two nuts that hold this on. So I'm going to take those nuts off, put this back on and tighten the nuts up. I'm not too sure on the nuts, I think they were 12 Newton meters. Then there was a plug on here which I'm going to re-plug in. This then has the vacuum pipes. This one goes onto the turbo. So that can be fitted onto there. Then there's an electrical connector which plugs into there. So once we've got the electrical connector on, the vacuum pipe and the heat shield, the only thing left to do around here is to reposition this metal hose into its clamp that I talked about earlier and reattach it to this, and that will be this top end back together in terms of where we were before we started removing the turbo. What I've got to mention is these screws that I used to tighten the heat shield onto the hot side of the turbo are 15 Newton meters tight, and they are T30s. We also have, I've just repositioned this coolant line, which sits and bolts on with a T30 screw there, and I've positioned the bracket down the side of there, and there's a T30 just there. They both need tightening up to 10 Newton meters. Okay, so just a little bit more on the balancing elements. I'm about to reinstall the DPF, so the balancing elements must turn freely in the thread. They must not be stiff or tight. Lubrication must only be applied to the thread. The retaining straps must remain clean. The retaining straps must be bent far enough together for the balancing element to be moved when the screw is screwed in. So basically, you get to test that, you get this screw that's supposed to go through the hole and try to send it through the balancing element, and if it grips the balancing element, then that means it's set correctly and it's going to do its job. So these are obviously left-hand thread. What they do is, as you send a bolt through them, as you send a bolt or a screw through them clockwise, they will grip the bolt, and as you turn them clockwise, they will screw up and out of their positions to meet the bolt, so that you get even tightening wherever you are on the DPF, so that there's no excess stress, because you could end up with a cracked DPF or exhaust gas cleaning module, as they call it on these Euro 6 cars, which is a big C shape, and you don't want to have lots of pressure on one end and none on the other, or opposite pressure on the other, because with all the heat cycles and the vibration it will crack. Anyway, I'm going to screw these in now and set them. So to do that, what you need to do is obviously make sure they move freely in the threads. Fully unscrew, to start with, you fully unscrew it, clean the threads and moisten them with a rust dissolver or anything, and give them a bit of a lubrication. Once they're clean and lubricated, you should then calibrate them, which is how I described earlier, using a socket and something with a correct dimension to push through the middle, or you can be fancy and have the T10512 calibration tool from Skoda. I couldn't find one. Then what you need to do is screw the balancing elements in fully by hand and unscrew them again by 45 degrees, and then they are ready for the area to be put back together. Okay, so then you would offer up the balancing, the exhaust gas cleaning module into its place and hook it onto the assembly aid, which obviously I've made one of myself, so I'll show you that in a sec. Once that's there, it's in a weight neutral position, allowing you to get everything else set up. So what you would do at that point is to make sure that it's sat in position and it's ready to be screwed in. And then what you do is unscrew the balancing element that it's sat on, and you can do this by using a socket insert which grips the balancing element. So you would find a suitable tool which will do that, and then you would unscrew that until it stops, until it's touching the exhaust gas cleaning module, and then you also unscrew it another 90 degrees. That way you've got the correct amount of tension, and then the screws can then be tightened in the sequence that it tells you, which I'll go through in a second. So first of all, let's find out what will turn these balancing elements. Okay, so as you can see, there's a hexagonal shape on the inside that enables you to drive it. That's an 8mm hex. So if you get a 8mm hex key, you can adjust these whilst they're obviously being covered by the DPF and bring them into position. So I'll get these installed and then we'll move on to the DPF itself. Okay, back under the engine. So don't know if I mentioned this already, but in order to get the DPF out, I had to remove the bracket that was in the way. Yeah, I'm sure I mentioned it. Anyway, the bracket is here and goes on up here. Oh, these are going to fall out on my face. The bracket goes in those three holes in the picture. The bolts for the bracket do, and then the last one, as you can see, there's a bolt there that goes through the mount on the bottom of the turbo and lines up with the bracket. So we've got a balancing element, we've got a 13mm bolt, and we've got 3 bolts which are all the same length, and they are all M12 ride. So what I had to do in order to get the DPF out was I had to drop the DPF enough to lean it out of the way, and then get my hand in to undo this bracket, and then slide the bracket out from behind the DPF, and then the DPF would move. So I'm going to have to do the reverse of that to get it back together. So rather than try and show you that, I'll explain to you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to pop the DPF up into this hole and let it sit between the engine and the subframe. Then I'm going to slide this behind it into position, and once it's in position, what I'm going to do is hand tighten all the bolts and then I'm going to tighten this one to 20 Newton meters. Then I'm going to tighten this one at the bottom, furthest away from it, to 40 Newton meters, and I'm going to tighten the top two to 40 Newton meters, and that will be that torqued into place. This balancing element, I've cleaned it, I've calibrated it, I've made sure it's free, I've turned it anti-clockwise on its lubricated threads until it bottomed out, and then I turned it 45 degrees back the other way. It is one that does not have a way of turning it to take up the pre-tension, so there's only one that does that, and that's the one at the top on the rocker cover. So, and it's a different size to the others, so you can't mix them up. So these ones are just self-tightening. Once you send something through, it will grip it and it will bring itself up to meet the bolt that you're sending through. So I'll get the DPF pushed up, get this installed, and then the DPF will go up and sit into its bracket once this is installed, and then we can try and attach it to the assembly aid, which you can see up there with the zip tie hanging down. I'll get my assistant to help me as I push this up. She will hook it on and it will be in a weight-free position for supposed stress-free fitting. Okay, so I've offered up the DPF into position. I've installed the bracket behind it, I've torqued that down, and then I've finished pushing the up into full position, and I've hooked. I've got my assistant Alex to hook the zip tie over this, which is connected to this contraption, which emulates the Skoda assembly aid. And now I've just checked to make sure that my lines are there for my exhaust pressure sensors, so nothing's trapped, everything's where it should be. I've just aligned the flange with the turbo and put the band clamp on with the new gasket, and I've just hooked that into place with no pressure on it. So that's what you're supposed to do first. So with it in place, we'll go underneath. Okay, now under here on the bottom of the DPF, you can see I've just started the bottom screw, so this is supposed to be screwed in hand tight. Just to bring it into position. Okay, once you've got it hand tight, you're supposed to loosen it by 90 degrees, just so that it's not pulling. Okay. Then we go back up top. Okay, next we are back up top, and we're going to be tightening this clamp, which is a 5mm hex key. We're going to be tightening that up to 8 Newton meters of torque. Okay, that's 8 Newton meters. Then we go back down. Okay, back underneath. So this bolt that we hand tightened and then loosened by 90 degrees, we're now going to torque it up to 20 Newton meters, and that is a M10 ribe. If you don't have an M10 ribe tool, you can get at it with an M8 hex key. Okay, so that's that step done. Then so the next step is to fit this screw, which is the one that came from the hole above. And what you do here is, because there's a a balancing element there. You're not supposed to turn it or anything. Can we get some visual? You're not supposed to turn it, you're supposed to insert it and push, and that will lock it into the balancing element. So that's pushed in as far as it can go, so that the balancing element will now have a grip on that. Then we need to do the same with the bolts that go on the side of the engine through into that balancing element, and the one up there as well. So let's do that. Okay, so if you remember, there was a flat-headed bolt there that went in the top hole. Push that in and that's it. And then this one, a little stud on the end, went in the bottom. Push. And that seems to be both of them seated. So next we have to tighten both of these to 20 Newton meters, and then lastly come round and tighten the top one that we've just pressed in to 20 Newton meters as well. That finishes us off for down here. So you can see here, as I screw this, let me just get you focused. So as I screw this 13mm bolt, by the way, as I screw that in, it's, there you go, it's starting to turn. And because it's turning clockwise, it's bringing itself out to meet the bracket. So there we go, so it's fully, they've met together there now, there's no tension on them. I'll show you with the other one as well, so you'll be able to see a bit easier on this one. So there's a bit of a gap there. Okay, so for the final stages of securing the DPF, we can see now down through this mounting position that there is a balancing element under there, and you can't see it, but there's a small gap between the balancing element and the DPF. So we're going to send an 8mm hex key in, and we're going to turn it clockwise, which is going to bring it up to meet, you can just see it turning there, up to meet the DPF. Okay, now it's bottomed out. Now from here we're supposed to turn it a further 90 degrees. So I'm just going to do that off camera because I've only got one hand, but I'm going to force that another 90 degrees, and then we can put the bolt in. Okay, so that was satisfyingly a decent amount of pressure. I could feel it putting on there as I gave it 90 degrees. This is the bolt for it. You should replace this because it's tightened to a specific torque angle. So press this in, and then that's it locked. So now we can tighten this to 20 Newton meters. Okay, then it wants us to tighten a further 90 degrees. And then a further 45 degrees. I have to do this one with my hands. And that is the DPF reinstalled. So next thing to put back on will be the EGR radiator, and then reverse procedure of everything else we did. Torque settings will be told as I go. Okay, so EGR radiator, so I've positioned it inside the DPF. I've aligned the gasket and the clamp. I have slid the hose onto the turbocharger, so that clamp just needs to be slid up and to hold its position. I have plugged the electrical connector back on, which is a bit hard to see now, but I have done that. It's in there in the sheathing, so that's on. And I've got these bolts down here in the little corner piece bracket. You can see 1 and 2, sort of 90 degrees adjacent to each other. Can I get a better view? There we go, them two. So what we're going to do is use, so on the band clamp for the connection between the EGR radiator and the DPF, it was not a 4mm. You know how I was confused how the other two band clamps, or whatever I've undone previously, yeah, the one for the pre-exhaust pipe and the one for the turbo to the DPF, they were both 5mm hex bits, and I couldn't see the one that I couldn't see the bolt properly for the one that goes from the EGR to the DPF. When I finally got it out, I thought it was a 4mm because a 4mm did it. However, I can now see it's a TX30. So I'm going to go and tighten the TX30 band clamp down to 7 Newton meters, and then I'm going to come up here again and tighten both of these bolts to 20 Newton meters, and I'm going to put that bracket on. The electrical connection is already back on. That is then the EGR radiator reinstalled, minus the connection from the water pipes, which I'll do next. Now that we've got everything plugged into the EGR radiator and that's all fitted and the hose is clamped on and everything's in its place, the next thing we need to do is replace this hose, put back this set of hoses, which connects up to that front hose. This hose goes on there, this hose goes onto there, and the back two pipes go to this and that one down there, if you can see it. There it is. So it's just a case of trying to thread this into place, because you have to get it underneath this plastic pipe, and the two metal pipes need to slip down past the gear selector. It does tell you to remove the gear selector in the manual, but I've done this without doing it, so you don't have to do that. You've also got this big bracket which sort of sits quite far down there, so it is a bit of a fiddle, but I'll get it into place, pop all the hoses back on, and then that's going to be secured, which I will show you now. Okay, so I've threaded it into its correct position, well, roughly. It can now reach its correct position, so the tube is going up against the hoses are able to sit sort of on the tubes. So what I'm going to do first is just slide all of the tubes on without applying the clamps. Then I'm going to push the pipe into the mounting position and get it torqued down. Then I'm going to pop all the clamps on once I know that everything's happy and there's no tension. So you're going to have a bolt that goes through here into here. That's a 10mm bolt and it torques to 10 Newton meters. Then down here you've got this long bracket which will screw into there with a 10mm bolt once it's in place. That is also going to be 10 Newton meters. And then further along you've got that bracket there which will slide onto that stud just above it, and then the nut will go on there and that will be tightened to 10 Newton meters as well. Okay, so with that all put back together, we're going to go back underneath and do the rear radiator hose, or coolant hose should I say. Okay, so from underneath we can see the two hoses, that one and that one, that we've just connected from the above left hand coolant hose. I've just reconnected that pipe onto this T-piece that we disconnected to move this out of the way. So I'm just going to move that clamp down to secure that position, and I've repositioned this pipe, hooked it in over, it has a fork that locates over the outside of the stud coming off the bottom balancing element on the side of the DPF, and then it just hooks over a stud here. So I've got a 10mm nut on there that I'm going to be tightening up to 10 Newton meters. There's a 13mm nut on there with the socket on to tighten up to 10 Newton meters, and there's a 10mm, so just there, 10mm nut bolt that I've put through there, that'll be tightened up to 10 Newton meters as well. That then gives us the bottom hose here, and there's another hose here that I've just pinned out that way that I'll move back down. That will allow us to start reinstalling the coolant pump, but that's not just yet, so we'll get this bar torqued down and go from there. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do whilst I've still got access is install this lambda probe. So there she is. I'm going to apply some hot bolt paste to the threads only, and that's going to go into its hole there. I'm going to tighten that to 52 Newton meters. So just a note, I did count the amount of turns that this unscrewed by, and it was 4, so I pre-tensioned it by 4 turns before putting it in. Now that it's hand tight, there's no twist on the wire whatsoever. It's very free and loose, there's no sort of tension on it or twist. So as we nip that up, it won't really change much. Now for this, I'm going to be using this homemade, very badly welded 22mm crow's foot spanner. Torque this to 52 Newton meters, and that is the lambda done. Okay, now it's time to reinstall this sound deadening / heat protection plate with these 2 bolts. They are an M12 ribe tool, and they're both tightened to 16 Newton meters. So this sits in here. Have I got it upside down? I've got it upside down. Okay, so 1 bolt hole up there and 1 bolt hole there. It will just fit in quite snugly. There we go. So that bolt hole and that bolt hole up there. Ignore this one for now. 16 Newton meters. So whilst we're down here now, we're just going to reinstall the coolant pump. So we've got the plug there which clips into it. Then we've got this one hose that goes on, and this hose that if I were to bring it out of its position that I've just pushed it into to keep it out of the way. So as we can see here, the pump has a bracket. The pump goes onto the pipes like so. The bracket then fits into that gap and into that slot and lines up for the hole, and the bolt goes in there to tighten the bracket on. I don't know why I said to leave that one out. I thought the bracket was held on by 2, but it's not, so we've got another one to put in there, 16 Newton meters, and then the one that holds the bracket on I think is also 16 Newton meters. Okay, so I've now removed the engine support bracket which I put together, so the engine can now swing freely in a pendulum motion. What we're going to do now is feed the drive shaft back through onto here while supporting this end joint, and then we're going to line this up and get the bolts started. They are an M10 ribe screw and they should be tightened hand tight and to get the joint aligned, and then we're going to pop the other end into the hub so that's supported at the outside, and then they're going to be tightened to 10 Newton meters in a cross pattern, and then once they're tightened to 10 Newton meters we're going to go around and tighten them again in a cross pattern to 70 Newton meters. Okay, so with that torqued up to 70 Newton meters, I've just popped the electrical connection back in the pump, by the way. You can see, clicked that in. As I said, I fed the front end of the drive shaft into the hub. I've aligned and posted through the studs into the bottom arm and pop the nuts on, so they're ready for tightening up. We're ready for a new hub bolt in there. Mine was damaged, and also the steering joint needs to be popped into its socket, and this nut needs to be tightened up. So for those, these 3 nuts are to be tightened to 40 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. This one needs to be tightened to 20 Newton meters plus 90 degrees, and the bolt that goes in here, which is a 24mm drive shaft bolt, is to be tightened to 120 Newton meters. The 3 on the bottom are 16mm hex socket, and that one is a 21mm. So get all these tightened up, and at that point it will be time to refit the exhaust. Also, just to mention, any of the nuts, bolts or fastenings that we've tightened to a certain angle of torque should always be replaced with new ones, because if you're told to torque something to a certain angle, it means you're stretching the bolt. So once you've stretched it once, it's not going to have the same effect again when you tighten it to the same amount, and if you keep doing that it will eventually snap. So just a little reminder there. So next thing is to reinstall the pendulum support. So that goes in here, and bolts go in there, in there, and in there. So we've got 16mm brand new bolt. Try and get that started. Obviously the engine's able to swing at the moment, so I've got to try and pull it to line it up with the threads. And then there's a shorter one as well. Okay, so I've tightened all three of them down to finger tight, or hand tight. That big one is a 21mm socket. So the first thing we're going to do now is tighten the two smaller ones to 50 Newton meters. Then we're going to tighten the big one to 130 Newton meters, and then we're going to tighten all three of them from the big one to the and then the two little ones a further 90 degrees. That'll be them tightened. Then we can move on to the exhaust. So with that done, we can move on to the exhaust. The bolts on my clamp were completely rusted through, so I had to cut them out. You're supposed to replace the clamp, but it don't really need replacing. I've just put some M8 stainless nuts and bolts through with some washers on. So I'm going to torque this down to the original specified torque, which is 30 Newton meters. And to set this up, I'm just gonna slide this on to the exhaust, the main exhaust that goes to the rear. We've then got the pre-exhaust here, which is loose. So we're going to push that forward, send it to its mounting point. But what we're going to do is we're just going to put them together like that. Slide the clamp over both of them. So that is now loose, but in the correct orientation for where it needs to be. That will allow an easier fitment of the part up front where it connects to the DPF. So we're going to go that way now, but at the other end, well, halfway down this piece, I'll show you. So just after this plastic cover, it's hard to see because I'm let me just zoom out a little bit. I didn't realise I was zoomed in then. So we're just behind the subframe here. There's like a bulkhead piece here, just underneath the flexi joint of the exhaust. As you can see, captive nut and bolt. Same at the other side. So put the bolts in there, that'll hold it in position. Just put them in loosely. They're going to be torqued to 20 Newton meters. So at the moment they were just resting on a couple of threads, not tight at all. That allows us to marry up the exhaust pipe with the DPF. So as you can see at the moment, if we can get the camera in, see if I can go. No, I can't go from that way. Let's see if we can do it this way. There we are. It's obviously more difficult to film than it is to do, but you've got plenty of flex there. You've got the wiggly end of a flexi joint, so you can really easily get these two together like that. Get the clamp around it, and the clamp, obviously I've got a new seal there in between fitted. The clamp needs to be locked into place. I believe that is also a 5mm hex key, and that is to be tightened to 7 Newton meters. So I'm going to tighten that now. I'm going to get that on, tighten it, then I'm going to go back and tighten the 20 Newton meter bolts on the bulkhead of the exhaust where it meets the subframe. Then I'm going to go back and slide the exhaust clamp away from the joint, use a bit of exhaust assembly paste, slide it back over the joint and clamp that down to 30 Newton meters, and that'll be the exhaust put back together. So if we just reconnect the oil level sensor, that's everything under here done. So what you could do in theory is, obviously I've reconnected these pipes, which I did just after draining the coolant. That's everything under here done, so you could put the underbelly cover on, put the wheel on, let the vehicle down and be finished under here, but I'm just going to leave it as it is so that I can run the vehicle up and make sure there's nothing leaking first. So go back up on top now. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is attempt to fill the system with coolant. So here's my homemade contraption that mimics their special refilling tool. It's not perfect, so it might not work, but we'll give it a go. That's attached to the good old Kirby. I'm going to open this valve, which will allow the Kirby to pull a vacuum into the system. I'm going to close this valve, which will not allow, that will ensure that nothing gets sucked up from the coolant. And yeah, I'm going to hold this in position, which is the innards of one of these expansion tank caps, so that should seal. If it doesn't, I will put some more O-rings around it, make it a tighter seal. I'm going to hold this in place, try and create a vacuum, and then I'm going to close off this tap, hold the vacuum and open this tap, and that should pull the coolant in. That's the way they do it. They have a contraption similar to this, except it screws onto the header tank and it's got a gauge which allows you to see how much vacuum you're pulling. So I'm going to attempt to do that, because if that doesn't work, I'm going to have to try and fill it manually, which will require access to all these pipes so that I can take as many pipes off as possible and fill them all from all different directions, because that's the only other way I'm going to have half a chance of doing it, because apparently these systems are a nightmare for airlocks. So wish me luck. I'm not going to try and record it because I need more than two hands as it is just to do the job without recording, but I'll get back to you and let you know how it went. Well, I started and I thought, you know, vacuum's been on for 5 minutes and it doesn't seem to have done anything. This is a ridiculous idea, it's nowhere near strong enough. So I locked it off, opened up the other side, and it's probably taken about 500 mil. I shall repeat and see how we get on. Okay, so I found it much more effective and quicker to just give it a really good suck on this tube, get some vacuum, lock the valve off, open the other one, and it seemed to be a much stronger pull. The proper tool obviously creates almost a perfect vacuum and probably does the job in one go, but you know, we've not all got access to that kind of stuff. So that is the header tank, probably at maximum actually now. What I am going to do is I'm just going to, this is the highest level water pipe I can find. I'm going to undo this, pull it off. In fact, just following that, it reaches to the top of here, so it is the highest. So I'm going to pull this off, and I'm going to try and apply some suction to that. Basically what I need to do is just check that there's coolant up at the top of the engine and that there's no blockages, and that I can see for myself that there's no blockages. Now it has taken slightly more coolant on than what I drained, but also there was some that came out after I finished draining, some that came out and didn't get caught, that kind of thing. So I'm just doubly making sure I'm just going to take that hose off. You don't want to be sucking on it and getting coolant in your mouth because it's toxic. However, what I do want to do is just see if I can apply some suction to it and get some stuff to come out. So I'll do that via attaching it to a clear hose and see if I can get some coolant to come through the clear hose. Yeah, other than that, the only other part might be near the heater matrix. We did have this hose off before. Might be worth just slipping it off and seeing if we get any air rushing out or any coolant coming out. But then again, do I want to introduce air to the system if it is bled up? Yeah, I might just stick with this top one for now, see how we go. If I do this, I can hear coolant. Can't hear any air rushing around as such, and when I do squeeze that, we've got motion in the header tank. So, you know, it's all looking good. I think we might just do that top hose and say that it's done there, and see if it can bleed itself a little bit as we use it. Next, really easy one, the fan shroud. So that just slides down. Oh, actually no, we had to take it in sideways, didn't we? So you bring that down, and once you've got it past the top radiator hose, you can bring it into orientation. Like so. Then just want to get your tabs lined up, and once you've done that, it should just be as simple as pushing down. Make sure we've got the other side in before we push it all the way. There we go, nice satisfying clunk, and that one's gone as well. So the only thing left to do with this is to re-plug the connection. Just sprayed a bit of WD-40 in there to dispel any moisture. And that will slide inside there and lock on. So that's that, good to go. That then clips into its little holder somewhere. Which part clips in? It appears to be I'm not even showing you, but yeah, it's that big plug, and there we are. It's clipped into its position now, so can't really see it, but it is there. So coolant sorted, radiator fan sorted. Next thing is going to be boost pipes. So I've got the hard pipe here. It goes under here, and screws up into here. These are T30 screws, and then you've got this support on the side, which is also a T30. These ones go to 8 Newton meters. This one goes to 10 Newton meters, and when we install the next piece, which will be this, that will go onto the on the intake side of the turbocharger, the under pressure side, with the new bolts that were supplied. These will be tightened up to 15 Newton meters. So these ones that came, the ones that came with it were T30, but these new ones are a 4 mil hex key. So then it'll just be a case of tightening this clamp up, which I don't have a tightening torque for, but it's just a Jubilee clip, so you just do it until it's hand tight on a screwdriver. That'll be the boost pipe back into position. Okay, so with that tightened up, ready to put the air guide pipe in place. So for that, we're going to start by placing the air box back in place, which also goes hand in hand with this shroud piece that sits over the radiator shroud and connects to the front of the airbox like that. So we can see 1, 2, 3 plastic ball fixings that go into 1, 2, 3 mounting points on the bottom of the airbox, and then there's a little drain pipe that just roots down into the abyss. So we're going to shuffle this into place, hooking it underneath the radiator hose. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a little bit of a spray WD-40 on the mounting point, just so they slip in nicely. Make sure the drain pipe is pointing down to a place where it will drain to the floor. Okay, lift this pipe out of the way. Squeeze it past the loom there, so I can feel it sitting on the first one. I can feel it sitting on the back one. And I can feel it now, feeling quite central. So I'm going to try and push down. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. That's solid. Well, it's not solid, it's slightly movable, but it's in place. So then what we're going to do is feed this. What we're going to do is we've got to go under here once I've taken these bolts out, and then onto there at the same time. So there may be a little bit of jiggery pokery in terms of lifting this up and guiding them together. This obviously needs to be lifted up and held in place so it can then be clipped into these holders later on. So I'm just going to weave that into position. So this screw and this screw are tightened to... Start again, shall I? So this screw and this screw are tightened to 2 Newton meters. They're T25 torques. Then we can place the cover back over this and tighten these screws. Remember, there are clips that hold this on, as well as the screws themselves. There we go. Clip in place, everything else is sat where it should be. These are also T25, they're also tightened to 2 Newton meters. Then we can put the air filter back in, or obviously a new air filter if yours isn't already pretty much new like mine. Then what we need to do is get the air guide pipe, which goes into the cold side of the turbo. Okay, so what we're going to do is, if you look at that, there's 3 tabs there. They go into and lock in place, and then you've got the bolt there, which is a T30 Torx and needs to be tightened down to 8 Newton meters. So we'll align this. Again, I'll try to do it with one hand, but it's easier with 2, so I'll do the video in so you don't have to. You can disconnect this completely and install it just the elbow and then have the pipe on later, but it's not actually that difficult to do. It's just a tight squeeze really. So as you can see, I've managed to push that in, so now I'm going to move it, rotate it towards me, and then it locks into its tabs. At the same time, the bolt lines up with the hole, so I'm now going to tighten that down to 8 Newton meters. Okay, so with that in, we can now guide the top of the air filter housing into place. What we need to do is just put some tension on this hose clamp so that it can go over its fitting. Okay, so with that tensioned, we can introduce the air filter housing into the pipe. Just use 2 hands. Okay, once that's on there, you can then line up the edge of the box with the edge of the base, and you should hear a nice satisfying close there. Then we need to tighten all these screws down to 1.5 Newton meters. These are all T25s. Okay, so I've released this clamp into position, everything's tightened down. Just have to put this connection back in that I've just coated with a bit of WD-40, attach this clip back to the vacuum pipe, attach the vacuum pipe back to its holder and back onto the air guide pipe. Then with this pipe in place, we can attach the pipes that were in the little, we can attach the pipes that were in the little holder, and that is this area all tidied up. So next is to reinstall the breather pipe, which is just hanging out here. Satisfying click, that's in. Now we've got the first lambda sensor and the first 2 exhaust gas temperature sensors to install again. So I know which one's which. I marked that one with yellow, and there's a mark down there with yellow, so I know that goes in there. And if you remember, this was pointing straight down to the floor, which means I need to route correctly the cables. Obviously they're going to go into these clips, but you're going to route them down the back so that when your sensor sits in, the tail points downwards towards the back of the car and towards the floor. Hot bolt paste on these, 17mm. Hot bolt paste on the other one, which is obviously a very much longer wire, so you know it's the one that's further away. Some bit of hot bolt paste on there, straight in. That one is not 17mm. My mistake, that is a 19. This one's a 19 as well. They both need hot bolt paste on, and they're both to be tightened to 60 Newton meters. Then we've got the lambda sensor, which is obviously a 22mm. You'll need a lambda socket for that, and that is to be tightened to 55 Newton meters with some hot bolt paste on the threads only. Okay, they're all in and tight. So we have this little piece of insulation that was wrapping around this wire and the temperature sensor, and was it around? I don't think it was around the lambda. There's not enough slack on that, but definitely those two. So I'm just going to wrap those two back up with this so that they're not getting too hot. Okay, so now I'm going to route this wire and these two down here through these clips so that they're exactly where they were, going to their respective plugs over there. Okay, then for these two that are down here, there's a side clip for them to go into, which is this one. I'm just going to shove them into that guide there so that they're held tight against the heat shield. Okay, so with that done, the last thing to do before we can fire the engine up and check everything's okay is to reinstall this pressure sensor bracket and lines. So this screw is what holds the bracket down, and the bracket also, if you can see there, it sort of hooks itself into the little indent there, a little hole in the back of the rocker cover. So we're going to feed these lines down, reattach these hoses, then reinsert that screw that holds them in, which is down there. I believe that's meant to be tightened to, yeah, I believe that one is 5 Newton meters, and I believe I use a T25 on a flexi shaft to get it because it's easier, even though it's a T27. I think that's the way around it is. Then there is the screw that goes into the rocker cover, which holds the bracket down, and that screw is a T30 and is tightened to 8 Newton meters. Once all that's reconnected, I'm obviously just going to plug these in. I'm going to close up my my heat shield. I'm then going to, if you remember on the back, there's some clips there which this cable clips into to keep it away from the DPF, and then there is the little hood there which goes over here, somehow wraps around and clips in. I can't quite remember how that is. I'll have to look back at the video or the picture of before I started, and that will be it. Then we can start up the engine, make sure there's no leaks, and hopefully, if you've done everything right, you'll be good to go. You can put the wheel back on, underbelly tray, engine cover, check all your fluids, and good to go. You may have to do some adaptations if you've installed a new DPF. For those who like to gut their DPF, you'll obviously get an engine management light. You'll have to go and have that seen to by someone who can map it out. just out of curiosity, I got a quote from the mains dealers, and they were going to charge £6,600 for this job. It was a bit more on there as well, but I stopped listening after 6,600. It's taken me at least 3 days, because I don't have all the correct tools. I don't have an engine lift and a ramp, and I'm not going off someone else's labour hours or anything like that, so it takes as long as it takes. But I've been at it for 3 days and it's very involved. Some of that time was spent, and 7 hours of that was spent travelling to pick up a new turbo, so probably close to 2 full days on the job. And I think in total it's stood me in at just under £1,000. So happy days. Hopefully it's been not too lengthy and very informative, and hopefully it's enabled you to take on something which you may not have fancied taking on originally.